Saturday afternoon, I sat in the back of the bar, enjoying the silence. This place had become a favorite of mine a few years ago when I was out walking alone. I discovered it shortly after I came here after leaving Paradise, the place I called home. At the time, I bought a local gas station and garage for cheaper than they were worth. It had been for sale for 2 years. The owner was desperate to sell it. I saw the potential in it and made a lowball offer as I thought it was the perfect place to start over. It helped me to leave behind what I was forced to leave behind. The first thing I did was build a large retail store at the front of the lot facing the gas stations to supply the town after the only grocery store closed for the evening at 7 o'clock and change the pumps to pay at the register. To do this, I had to move the tanks. Now the pumps were visible from the store, which left plenty of parking spaces for customers in the center of our large lot. 7 p.m. to midnight was the busiest time in the store. The gas bar shop was now open 24/7. The garage, which was at the back of the lot, was open from 8 to 5, 5 days a week. On Saturdays, I would come in and work on special projects. The bar was upset for a while when the retail part started selling basic liquor. As with most similar establishments in small towns, you couldn't get rich quick, but the bar provided a very good income and helped create needed jobs in the community. Each year, we managed to save better than many others. With no real jobs outside of farming, most of the young people left as soon as they could. After a little restructuring of the store's internal merchandising, thanks to a woman I had to hire, it turned into a very successful business. In a short time, it paid back the money I had put into it as an equity loan. We had to double the staff. It got so crowded. On Friday and Saturday nights, we sold a lot of junk food, as those leaving the bar were trying to sober up a bit before going home. On Sundays, we sold lots of cold beer at reasonable prices. I was just sipping a double shot of Jack Daniels with a glass of ice water and a cut lemon, having just finished replacing the steering column in an old-aged truck. It was a family heirloom, his pride and joy. It took me 8 months to find the part, and even after that I had to hand fabricate some fixtures for it. His family had been driving this truck since the 40s, and he had no intention of stopping. I thought if he wanted to, he would have been buried in it. 4 to 7 was the best time to be at the bar, since most of the regulars had already had dinner. In a couple hours, the place would be filled with a musical crowd when the band played. Farmers used to bring their farmers' daughters here for after-work entertainment. In the 6.5 years I worked here, I gained a solid reputation and made quite a few friends. Most of the locals had a habit of looking out for each other and would tell me when something unusual was going on. I only came to the bar once a week, always on Saturdays at the same time, to have my one drink before heading home. It was my free time, which I used to quietly gather my thoughts. I saw them walk in and wished I hadn't because they automatically ruined the end of a perfect day. I still recognize them anywhere, anytime, any place, and I still wish I had. The woman was my ex's twin sister, and the young man with her I called my son at one time. It brought back memories I wouldn't have wanted. It was a period when I realized that you can't see evil when you live with it. Since the last time I saw him, he has grown up. His appearance had changed a lot. He looked more like his biological father. This proved to me that eventually the truth would come out, no matter what. The question today was, why were they looking for me now? They walked right up to the bartender to chat with him for a bit. I saw her pull a picture out of her purse and show him. The bartender said a few words to them, and I saw them turn and walk back out the door. I was thankful for my long, unkept hair, beard, and mustache because it helped me look completely different, especially since I had lost the extra weight I used to carry around. No one paid attention to the message I sent. All it said was, "Come home when I can." About a half hour later, the bartender came out from behind the bar. He walked over and sat down at the table. "What did they want, Tom?" I asked. "They want to give you a message. They say they heard a rumor that you live here, and they came to check it out." Tom replied, "They say that a man named Willa is dying of cancer and doesn't have long to live. They are looking for you because she wants to make peace. I asked to see your picture, stating that I don't recognize your name. Who are they, and what do they want? I pulled out my red Pall Mall 100, took out a cigarette, and ripped off the filter, putting the smooth end in my mouth, then lit it. This woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The young man is my wife's illegitimate son, whom she passed off as mine for years. Based on your years of experience in summarizing this, what do you think? I asked. Were they telling the truth? This time I'm reading their body language, he replied. I'd say they're partly trying to be honest, but definitely hiding the truth about something big. I nodded my head. My ex-wife and her sister had always been masters of deception, making it look like what you see on your face while stabbing you in the back. He stood up and went back behind the bar. My thoughts went back to the events of almost 7 years ago. When I left then, I told them I wouldn't be back for another 7 years. They all laughed at me like I was just a fool. I guess to them I was. They learned a hard lesson that day, because that was the last time they saw or heard from me directly. They didn't believe I was that serious or hurt. They thought I was just mad because of their joke. They didn't know that a few weeks earlier, I had learned that our youngest child was my brother-in-law's son. That started my journey of discovery that led me to this moment. Little did they know then that the proof was provided to me by a family member who said she had seen Willa and Tammy, the evil twins as she called them, stab me in the back all too often. In this old lady's opinion, they were black witches who practiced their art with pure evil. Earlier that week, even before I left, we discovered a freshly purchased insurance policy on me with a double indemnity for accidental death. If I died accidentally, the payout would be $4 million. The Grand Dame told me to flee. When I left the house for my work truck, they had no idea it was already loaded with everything I wanted from my 16-year marriage. I pulled onto the county road, turned right, and never looked back. By the time I came to a stop behind the wheel, I was already 2 states away from home. I have to admit that it was partly my fault, because I knocked Willa up when she was 16. I was 18 and just out of high school. My family convinced me to do the right thing, and that summer we were married. Soon there were 2 more children. They were still laughing about what they had done. In their opinion, it was just hilarious. Willa told our daughters, "Your father will come back when he cools off. He really needs to regain his sense of humor." A few hours later, my wife saw a sheriff's department car pull up to the house. She went to the door to greet him as he walked from the parking lot. "Are you Mrs. Willa Racine?" he asked. When she answered yes, he said, "Mom, you've just been served." "What?" she asked jokingly, because she thought it was all a big joke. When she opened the envelope, it was the first time they all knew how much I knew. I learned from the Grand Dame that my wife was shocked to learn that I had dissolved our marriage without a second thought. My attorney and I even listed all of our assets and liabilities. The DNA report showed everything. The affair lasted a year. The divorce petition included time, date, place, and receipts from the hotel, showing the credit card that was charged. The material supplier even provided photos of the couple during the entertainment. In the legal envelope, at my request, he enclosed a sealed letter. Upon opening it, Willa's sister learned that I was suing her husband for non-payment of child support, adultery, and public defamation. Then their laughter stopped. No one thought it was funny anymore. I was no longer the joke they thought I was. I was the one who had the last laugh. After all, their joke was that the only thing I was good for in their eyes was making money. Everything I did seemed to turn to gold and provide cash flow, so Willa and the kids were spoiled to bits and didn't need anything. Later in the afternoon, Willa found out that I had sold 3 of our businesses that I had built from scratch and paid off all the debt. Even the 2 apartment buildings we owned were gone. I sold them at a nice profit. I canceled all credit cards and removed my name from all bank accounts. I signed over my half of our house to her and took half of what we were worth in cash. All she had to do was agree to the divorce. In doing so, I reduced our cash flow from about $10,000 a month to 0. Unfortunately, Willa's sister had to learn firsthand what it cost them to use me to their advantage. My attorney took everything they had before the divorce, because I had damaged them all. He froze their assets before they even got a subpoena. After the divorce, they were both broke. My attorney called her into his office when it was finalized and reimbursed her for a quarter of what they lost. Why would he do that? She asked. My lawyer replied that for him it had never been about the money. For him, it was, and still is, a matter of principle. If you don't know, it's something that you and your sister have proven you don't have. He believes that by giving you this money, he is giving you a chance to start over, and hopes that you will learn from your experience. Willa refused to agree to a divorce until she spoke to me in person. So we were both still in an uncertain position, legally separated, but not divorced. I had no need to talk to a person who had knowingly lied to me for years. She had to work for the first time in her life. It was a new experience for her to learn that money disappears quickly and doesn't come in. I had my attorney forward anything important to the mailbox I rented from the FedEx store, and once a week they forwarded everything to my work address. I did this intentionally because I knew that given our history together, their shit would never stop. These two sisters love to play on people's emotions and manipulate everyone involved in their lives. Knowing both of them, I knew they would plan their revenge. It wasn't a question of if, but when. In their family, there was no such thing as being able to leave. If they couldn't find me, it would really upset them. The longer this went on, the worse their payback would be. There was no way someone was going to get past them. Up until now, I thought I had succeeded. With Tammy's appearance, I realized that their game wasn't over yet. I finished my drink and headed toward the house through the back door in case they were watching the front. I crossed the empty lot behind the house and walked around the block on the back paths, heading for my pickup. I was just unlocking the door and preparing to climb inside when a man stepped forward and said, "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Arthur Seth Racine, no doubt about it." I turned and looked at him and said, "How do you know that?" "My name is Peter Edwards. Your oldest daughter Connie is my wife," he said. "It could be a blessing or a curse for you," I said, "if she acts like her mother. So why are you here and what do you want?" "I came looking for you," he said. "Some things need to be settled in the past." "That would be the case if your mother-in-law," I said, "would just sign a divorce agreement." "What divorce agreement?" asked Peter in surprise. I told him to get in his car and follow me. After a few minutes on the main street in town, I turned right and drove about a mile, then turned left onto a long driveway. I stopped at the farmhouse and led him into my home office. I pulled out a folder of divorce papers, turned on the printer, and told him to make copies of anything he would need. Peter didn't need to know that I didn't live here, but had built it for the grand dame who we hoped would finally say she was ready to move out of paradise. Peter was a pleasant-looking young man, about 25 years old. His hair was professionally styled. He had a self-confidence that came quite naturally. He seemed to me to be an educated man. I wondered if he was who he said he was, and if he was part of Willa and Tammy's team. He used my Wi-Fi password and downloaded everything into his laptop from my home computer. All the important records were stored here, and the master copy was in a safety deposit box. One of the things he was interested in was a copy of the Sheriff's Department report that Willa had to sign the day she was served with the summons. The only thing he was able to print out was a letter from Willa's attorney to mine. It was the letter from the lawyer to my lawyer that did the most damage to what he had been told. In it, everything was written in black and white. Willa and her attorney had agreed to a property division, but would not sign off on the divorce until I spoke to her in person. The letter from her attorney acknowledged that they had received all the money owed. While he was doing all this, I had the opportunity to observe his facial expressions. It was obvious that he had no idea what he was learning. My paperwork, as it was laid out, contradicted what he believed. "Do you think Connie knows?" he said. "That's a question you'll have to answer for yourself," I replied. "And here's one question for you. Is Willa really dying of cancer or not?" "Who the hell told you that?" asked Peter. "Tammy was in town with Seth today looking for me," I replied. "That's what they told a bartender they know." "She's fine. She's living in a common law marriage with the man who was her lawyer at the time, and she's carrying his second child now, Peter said. She's the one who asked me to find you to start the divorce. She claims it's necessary so she can remarry. He opened his cell phone and called his wife. I could hear her in the background. Then he put it on speakerphone so I could hear both sides of the conversation. Connie, did you know that your mother lied about the divorce not being finalized yet? Peter asked. Asked Peter. Asked Peter. What are you talking about? Connie replied. You know that our father left town because he was broke. Right after he left, we kids left too, so we weren't home when Mom found out. Mom told us later that it looked like our deadbeat dad had abandoned all of us. Mom and Aunt Tammy told us later that he cleaned out whatever was left before he left town. If it hadn't been for stepfather, we wouldn't have survived. I'm sending you the legal file. Have my sister look after our child, said Peter. Then contact me as soon as possible when you've read it. While they talked for a few more minutes, I got up, pulled out 2 bottles of Bud, and opened them. I put one in front of him. Why didn't you tell my daughter you found me? I asked. Connie and I have only been married about 2 years. She gave birth to our son 3 months ago. Rest assured, for now, I'm not going to tell anyone that I found you, Peter said. As far as everyone in the family knows, I'm working hard investigating a case. With those words, he opened his wallet and showed me his badge. It said he was a police officer for the Paradise Police Department. I opened my laptop and opened the hometown webpage. Clicking on the link took me to the police department webpage. This proved that he was telling me the truth. It was that accident that was reported a few months ago that gave me the lead to find you, Peter explained. Connie wrote a report on your disappearance, which was forwarded to the wanted list. The insurance company informed me of the ruling in your favor. So why didn't you tell Connie you found me? I asked again. In reviewing your detailed file, it became clear that there might be something else going on, Peter said. The first question I had to ask was what happened to the $250,000 in cash that Willa was supposed to receive in addition to the house deed. The second is why are they all lying about what really happened? Yeah, sounds like someone's been fed a bunch of lies, just like me, I said as his cell phone rang. It's my wife, I'll put it on speaker, Pete said. So please keep it down. Hi, honey, my daughter said. Where did you get all this from? Is it true? If so, we've all been lied to over the years. Seth has no idea of his true origins, and neither do I. My sister Karen will be shocked to see this. My mom chastised her severely for always sticking up for our father. Yes, so much so that they no longer speak. This story is different from the lies we've been told. Apparently, Mom and Auntie gave Dad no choice. The two of them have been playing with his life behind his back for years. What bothers me is the fact that the divorce is not finalized because my mother won't sign off on it. It makes me wonder what is really going on. It's true. I got the information directly from the widow of your father's lawyer. Unfortunately, I had to travel out of state to find her. It seems her husband kept duplicates of all his records on his home computer. Peter said, I'm glad he did. From the paperwork, it looks like your mother was served with a divorce petition the same day he left. And I wrote on a piece of paper for Connie to talk to her great-aunt Josie, if she was still alive. Peter nodded his head. Pete, it's more important to find my father now, Connie said. My father deserves to be free of my mother and her scheming, if only to finalize the divorce. What happened to the money she got? If the house belonged to her, why did she have to sell it? The more I look into the facts, the more I wonder what the hell was going on and why she was planning to sue him for desertion as soon as she found him. Hey, I have an idea. Ask my sister to watch our son a little longer. And you talk to Aunt Josie and tell her what we found out. Maybe that will get her to open up, Peter said. To you about what she knew. It has to stay with us for now because it's beginning to look like there may be some serious fraud going on here. The question must be asked as to why your mother has been slandering your father for years. I'll have to talk to the district attorney about that. $250,000 in cash seems to have disappeared as soon as it fell into the hands of your father's lawyer. One last thing. Don't tell your sister about this yet. If the DA wants to investigate, it's best that no one knows anything. I got up from the table to get us a couple servings to give him some privacy until they finished their conversation. Why do you want Connie to talk to Aunt Josie? Peter asked. Josie was the one who gathered all the information about Willa and George's affair, I said. She may never have been married in her life, but she watched over the whole family like a mother hen raising her only daughter. Being a single mom changed her perspective on many things. She thought Tammy and Willa conspired and set it all up. Both George and I were being used, but what their ultimate goal was remains to be seen. If it's true, the question is why, said Peter. Aunt Josie's granddaughter Jody has wanted her to move in with her for years. She keeps saying no until the truth comes out. We see Jody when she comes to town with her 2 sons. Well, Jody, Josie's granddaughter leads a very withdrawn life, I said, as do I. Socializing with the Weather sisters seems to take a toll on everyone around them. Willa and Tammy have used people for most of their adult lives. It wasn't until Josie gave me the material that I started to realize that. Do you want to ask me about your children and what's going on in their lives before I leave? Peter asked. Not until it's proven that you are who you say you are, I replied. Given the family's history, this could just be another part of their game, and you're doing what they told you to do. You might want to look into the sudden death of my lawyer, because if she's planning to sue me, what makes her sure she can win? Peter's face turned white. I think he realized for the first time in his life what kind of people he had married. We decided to trust each other enough to exchange cell phone numbers. He promised to let me know if he knew anything. I got up and walked him to the door, shook his hand as we said goodbye. When he left, I cleaned up and locked the apartment. I got in my car and took the long way home where Jody was waiting for me, just to make sure I wasn't being followed. It gave me the time I needed to think things through. My life had improved greatly since I had put the past behind me. Did I want to relive it all again? Did Willa and Tammy have a long-term revenge plan because they needed to get the upper hand on me? Knowing these two, I knew I had to prepare myself for what I was about to face, because if they ran out of money, they would go to any length out of greed to get it. As soon as I walked through the door, 2 little babes grabbed my legs. I bent down and picked up the 2 little ones. At their 3 and 4 years old, they were the apples of my eyes, just like their mother. I felt blessed to have all 3 of them in my life. My mutual wife Jody called out that dinner was almost ready, so go wash up. I happily agreed. Over dinner, I told her about what had happened since I closed the store. I couldn't have imagined how my life would turn out the day I left paradise for good. When I left town almost 7 years ago, I promised my grandmother Jody, the grand dame of Josie's, that I would keep in touch with her, and I did. I tried to call her every Sunday. It had been a year and a quarter since the day she called me, needing my help. Her only granddaughter needed to get out of a failed marriage and find a safe place to start over. At the time, Jody was 10 years younger than me and had no children. I didn't know much about her since they lived on an army base and were out of state. But I owed Josie a debt of gratitude and was glad I could repay her for all she had done for me. It took me a week to find a 2-bedroom apartment for her and partially furnish it. For the most part, finding a place to live in a small town is nearly impossible. I found it thanks to a friend of a friend. The day I arrived to pick up Jody, she had quit her job, cleaned out her bank accounts, and packed her bags. Her husband was about to enlist in the army as soon as he got home from his last military service on base, which was a 2-week intensive training exercise. They were going through a drill that simulated real combat conditions, and so they were out of the house for the entire time. It was about 8 in the evening when I pulled up to her house in the U-truck I had just rented for a one-way trip. I arrived quietly, without giving anyone a heads up. Along with a few of her neighbors and friends, we moved everything she wanted into the back of the rented truck. I was in and out of her town in less than 4 hours. When asked where I was from, I refused to answer, saying it was better that no one knew for now. As we drove back, Jody and I began to get to know each other. It was deep into the night when she got a call from her grandmother. I smiled when she said, "Yes, Grandma, Art picked me up. You could have warned me that he is a wild bushman who might look half decent if he cleaned himself up. The next day, Josie contacted her granddaughter's attorney to have all her legal documents and communications mailed to my FedEx box. Jody warned us both that her soon-to-be ex-husband could cause quite a bit of trouble. I took a proactive stance to protect her. Over time, we both became convinced that my thinking about her situation was correct. Jody took over the management of my store. Over the course of a few weeks, she proved to me that the store really needed a good manager. It turned out to be the best decision I ever made, as she made it look easy. The changes she made with my approval made the job even more successful. For her, the needs of the customers came first. Her personality alone brought in many new clients. She worked with each of the employees, assigning responsibilities and establishing rules of behavior. She blessed us with becoming a staff problem-free operation. Josie had to get a restraining order against Jody's ex because of his constant verbal threats against her. He was dishonorably discharged for what he did because of Jody's departure, and he moved back to my old hometown because he thought that's where his ex-wife would be. Being the new girl in a small town makes you the center of attention, so to keep the horny single men at bay, Jody kept wearing her diamond ring. It gave her protection when she needed it most, and time to adjust to her new life. Within weeks, she was doing all the banking and getting the bookkeeping in order. Everyone accepted her because I brought her in. Jody was wonderful in every way, but I loved her personality and honesty. It didn't take her long to appreciate a person on their own merits. She had long, black hair hanging down, which she hid from her face. When asked who the lucky man was, she replied, "I'm sure you'll figure it out for yourself." That was all it took for the rumors to spread. Soon, because of the gossip, it became known that we had met on the internet. Behind our backs, she was being talked about as Art's future mail-order bride. On Saturdays, since I worked alone that day, she started bringing me a boxed lunch. I'm the kind of person who, when I'm busy doing something, forgets to take the time to eat. As a result, I lost a lot of weight. At this time, we started building our relationship. After a few weeks, everyone thought we were a couple. If one of us was invited somewhere, it was automatically assumed that the other would come too. Neither of us were looking for a new relationship, but we kind of grew into it. Josie kept us updated on what was going on at home. We became curious when we learned that Jody's ex was on friendly terms with Tammy. The day she got her divorce was the day our relationship went to the next level. We spent the night at the only drinking establishment in town with a group of friends. It was while doing a slow dance under the dimmed lights that we shared our first kiss. 6 months later, we moved in together. While the kids were in the bath getting ready for bed, I stuck a small wastebasket in the sink and shaved off my beard and mustache until there was nothing left but stubble. My children froze, watching me. I took the bowl and brush she'd bought me for Christmas and soaped my face, then did the same to them, much to their delight. Jody walked in, seeing why the kids were giggling, just as I started shaving. Her blue eyes gleamed with surprise. The faces of our 2 boys were soaped up. All 3 of them watched me as I finished what I had started. "It looks like Daddy would look like you with a clean face," Jody said teasingly. "Do you think I should cut his hair too?" Both toddlers answered yes. I just laughed and said, "That's something I can have the barber do on Monday." "No, I'll do most of it myself," Jody said, "before you have a chance to change your mind." So after drying them off and getting them dressed for bed, they sat at the kitchen table and watched their mom cut my hair. By the time she was done, I looked like a human being again. There was more hair lying on the floor than was left on the top of my head. I barely recognized myself when I looked in the mirror. I told Jody that she had done a great job. Jody sent me into the shower to rinse off all the fine hair and got to work cleaning up. While I was doing that, her grandmother called, as my daughter Connie had just left. Jody was under the impression that when it came to her grandmother's sister's family, Josie was planning to go to war. Her grandmother thought it was time to straighten those bitches out. Connie left her great-aunt's house knowing that each of my 3 children were to receive an annuity of $600 a month each in lieu of child support, purchased by me through Mutual Life. None of them were getting any of that. Damn, it was a wild night. If I had known shaving and cutting her hair would turn her on like that, I would have done it sooner. For the entire next week, I had to endure the "who are you and what did you do" jokes from everyone who knew us. Jody was asked if she had to blackmail me into joining normal society. Jody responded with her usual humor, saying that I had promised to make him take a bath at least 3 times a week. Most understood the joke, some didn't. It was interesting to see how things are in paradise when you believe your shit doesn't stink. Bird of Paradise informed me that I would be sued in civil court for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. Jody and I found this amusing. They thought that if they got a judgment, a collection service could be hired to find me. When the male aist broke the news to us, he thought it was a big joke. His boss and the DA even hired an attorney to speak on my behalf. Then he explained that they took advantage of my situation to give them time to put the pieces together. Peter estimated that Willa and Tammy had stolen over $48,000 from each of our children. They took a new look at the sudden death of my former attorney. Jody's ex-husband was now of interest to them. By revisiting the cold case for what I assumed was an accidental death, it was now an open criminal case. If what they learned was true, Willa and Tammy were facing 7 to 10 years in prison. Willa's former attorney, now her common-law husband, could be disbarred because he was the one who had filed the lawsuit. A scam had to be pulled in order for charges to be filed. The lawyer they hired for me would be paid for by them. They wanted all the records I had to surface at the end of the investigation because it would give them time to build a stronger case against them. I had to look in the mirror to make sure I had the word "sucker" written all over my face. For a few weeks, we had peace and quiet. Then the grande dame called. Josie called us Sunday night and told us that the paperwork would be filed on Monday. She emailed me everything she had collected over the past 7 years. She had masterfully assembled a whole truckload of notarized statements, personal conversations that were videotaped about what was going on, and the names of 3 or 4 attorneys who would be perfect for the countersuit she thought I should file. What caught my eye was the $2 million accident insurance policy. Neither of us knew it still existed. That explained where some of the money had gone. Jody found out it had been purchased 6 months before I left. Jody and I spent half the night forwarding all the information to the DA after reviewing it. Jody and I were certain that this was all being done to lure me back so that I could be set up to be taken out later. The next morning, Jody called all the attorneys Josie had recommended and picked one. Everything we had, we emailed them along with a huge retainer. As soon as Willa's team filed the lawsuit, I would send it to them to serve it on them before it came to me. It was Friday morning when Jody called me. Josie was getting ready to leave, bringing the Quests with her. They had left Paradise Thursday night, stayed overnight at a hotel, and were due to arrive tonight. They left in the dark of night in case they were being followed. That told me that things were starting to pick up on that end. Jody and I decided it was best to close up store on Saturday and have a real long weekend because of the family. Peter was riding with Connie and their son. All Connie knew was that they were going to visit Jody. It was almost 7 p.m. when we saw a Ford Explorer and Escape pull up in the driveway. When they pulled up, we saw 4 adults sitting in the 2 cars. Jody noticed my concerned look and took my hand in hers. My truck was parked inside the garage, so I knew no one would guess I was there. We watched them get out of their cars. My wife Jody asked, "Who's that with Josie?" "That's Peter, his wife, my oldest Connie, who is holding their baby," I replied. "And Karen, my second oldest." "Are you ready for this?" Jody asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, lifting our oldest. Lifting our youngest in her arms, Jody opened the front door. We all came out as a family to greet our guests. I was the last person my daughters expected to see. Karen instantly burst into tears. I handed my son to his great-grandmother and took Karen in my arms, holding her tightly against me. Connie, after handing her son to her husband, came over to me as well. It took a few minutes before my emotions began to return to normal. Both of my daughters had turned into very lovely ladies. Seeing them standing side by side was a memory I will never forget. Good to see you again, Peter, I said as I shook his hand. After the introductions, Jody served us all a huge dinner. It was a good thing Jody had prepared everything we needed: beef shoulder, mashed potatoes, gravy, fresh homemade scones, Yorkshire pudding, and string beans. A hot apple pie, fresh out of the oven, for dessert completed the meal. After the kids settled down, we started discussing everything in the world. First of all, Art, it's okay for me to call you Dad, Peter said. I nodded my head affirmatively. Then, Dad, the DA now believes that Jody's ex's car was the car that was in the way of your lawyer's car when the accident happened. We found the current owner and are now doing a paint comparison. If we can make the connection, he will be charged with manslaughter. Peter explained. The fire that destroyed his office that same night was always treated by fire inspectors as arson. He can be seen in the video in the background watching the building burn. Since Willa and her attorney have sealed the divorce papers, they believe there are no documents to prove what really happened. They filed a lawsuit against you this week. Jody looked at me and burst into tears. I always thought you were overprotective when you moved me here, and now I see that you weren't. I thought the questions you were asking my grandmother were overly persistent. I realize now that you needed to know what kind of person we were dealing with before deciding on a plan of action. Willa and Tammy received your lawsuit on Thursday, Josie said. They must have realized I was communicating with you. We were afraid they would start harassing me, which is why we came here in a hurry. Grandma, we got your house ready for you to move in, Jody said. It's already furnished, so all you need are clothes. I took most of it with me in the car, Josie said. Connie has agreed to ship the rest to me along with any personal items I want to keep, like antiques. I gave her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It was time for me to get out of paradise as soon as possible. I'll drive back with Peter and Connie and rent a truck to haul it all out, I said. It's time to find out if we're thinking right, I said. What kind of thinking? Asked Peter. That the lawsuit they filed against me is a ploy to lure me out, I said. Considering I have $2 million worth of accidental death insurance on me, it's clear that the death of my former attorney was a test to see if he could work with me. Peter, Connie, Karen, and Josie's faces turned white. It was as if they were seeing the light for the first time. None of them had seen the game plan, nor could they understand why. It wasn't until they heard my thoughts that they pieced it all together. My God, they were planning your death, Dad, Connie said, even before you left town. You knew about it. That's why you left the way you did. I replied with a broad smile. I had a good idea at the time, but even my lawyer didn't believe it. He seemed to have experienced firsthand that I was right. Peter excused himself to make some important phone calls. This gave my daughters, my wife and I, time to get to know a little about each other's lives. Jody dug up pictures of what I looked like when she first met me. Both of them had to admit that even they wouldn't have recognized me. When Peter came back into the room, everyone fell silent. Willa will be taken into custody the day after the holiday, near the end of the day. We can hold her in custody for 48 hours before charging her. She will be charged with 3 counts of theft for stealing an annuity from her children. Peter explained. We'll slow down the process, so it'll take her a few days to get a bond hearing. Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday and rent a U-Haul to go into town, stop at a few of your old places to get noticed. If anyone asks what you're doing, tell them you're here to pack Josie's things, Peter explained. That way, Willa will have to be communicated with through the city jail. The district attorney, when I told him your thoughts on this whole situation, said you got it right. Until you gave us your thoughts, we couldn't put it all together. When you get to Josie's house, we'll have police protection for you until everything is cleared up. Peter, are you telling me that the father of my children is the bait you need to lure my cousins out? Jody said. What assurances are you willing to give me that you won't call me and tell me that I became a widow before I was legally married? I looked at Jody, and she saw the look on my face and replied, Dem, you'll do it without a second thought, no matter what I think. That's what I could say about my Jody. She knew me better than I knew myself. Jody, Art has always been like that. That's why I called him in, to save you from the unknown when you finally decided you'd had enough of the crap your exes were carrying, Josie said. Art would never ask anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He wants us all rid of witches for good. If that's what it takes, it's worth it to him. Graham, my only fear is that Art will return to the Devil's Lair to face the unknown, Jody replied. Smiling, Josie replied, if Art were a boxer, he'd be a world title holder. There's no one in the world who thinks faster when he's on his feet. That's his advantage over the witches. Anything he does will knock them out. Jody, you have to remember that Willa and Tammy have no idea that Art knows anything. Ladies, relax. I'll be in Peter's hands, I said. If anything happens to me, remember that he will have to answer to Connie, who is my daughter. Peter knew better than to say anything, so he just shook his head. He knew how dangerous my return to paradise could be. Later, we had a chance to talk as the four women were deep in discussion amongst themselves about what was going on. The DA thinks Jody's ex will make his move right after he finds out you're in town. He'll know it was you who came and pulled Jody out of the horrible marriage she was in. He will be furious, Peter said. That information will come from Willa, who will be told this by a planted informant who will be locked up in the city jail early Thursday morning. The question is, if he's captured in the act, will he give it all up to save his own skin? I asked. We looked into his military background, Peter said. Whenever he's been caught, he's admitted to it and taken responsibility. He's a follower, not a leader, so I expect him to give up easily. The only reason he maintains a relationship with Willa and Tammy is because he's easily manipulated. The sign read, Welcome to Paradise, City of Refuge, population 34,823. All it gave me was confirmation that the City Council had declared that the laws of the United States of America did not apply here. Welcome to our version of the Wild West. Justice here depends on what we tell the boys in blue to do. Law-abiding citizens we prosecute, illegals we look the other way. We're not biased, after all. That's the progressive way. The privileged working class always has to pay for the sins of others because those in power had to please their masters who wanted the minimum wage lower and labor cheaper. To give them that opportunity, many things were done that required those in power to look the other way. Not much had changed here in almost 7 years, except for the freshly paved Main Street. Everything looked the same. I decided that if I wanted to get noticed, my first stop should be my old favorite establishment if it still existed. Luckily, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar still existed. It looked the same, only it was freshly painted. I pulled into the parking lot, got out of the U-Haul truck, and headed for the main entrance at 11:15. I was just ahead of the weekday lunch crowd that would be arriving. I was counting on the fact that since I was a businessman in a former life, my face would be recognized. We wanted them to know quickly that I was back. As I took a seat and picked up my menu, I noticed several faces looking at me. I saw several people using cell phones. A server approached with my coffee and creamer and asked if I was ready to order. Is Wednesday's specialty of meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes available? I asked. How do you know about that? The server inquired. It's meant for regular customers and it's not advertised. Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and some fried onions to go with the meatloaf, I said. The waitress looked at me like I was crazy. I stood up and said, Never mind, I'll tell him myself. I walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen, and the server followed me and barked out my lunch order. Jack turned and looked at me. You dumb ass, Jack said with a smirk. You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend. Susan, please bring Art's coffee over here. That way we can catch up while he eats at the end of the table. Jack was the son of the original owner and never changed the name. We'd been friends for most of our lives. We chatted until just before rush hour. He asked someone on the staff to get his wife to join us. It gave us a chance to talk about important things. Art, you should know that after you left, the wife severed her friendship with Willa and Tammy for good. She didn't like what they did or what they said about you and the kids. Jack, A few things are about to happen. Last night there was supposed to be an arrest that, if a few people think right, will lead to several events, just like a row of dominoes starting. I explained. Connie's husband Peter works with me. That's why I came back early. Jack looked at me completely seriously and said, "He's a damn good cop and an honest man. He put 2 of our former city council members in jail last year for corruption. You'll have to tell me what's going on later. There are too many big ears here." We saw Sasha pull into the parking lot. I thought to myself that she looked good. I sat down and waited for her to come in. I knew that when she came in, she would see me from the back and wouldn't think anything was wrong. "Jack, what happened? Susan said it was important," said Sasha when she saw me. I stood up and turned to her. Sasha, my little sister, had lost her temper. Her older, meaner brother had come home. I took her in my arms and hugged her tightly like it was just yesterday. It took her a few minutes to calm down. Jack asked the kitchen staff to leave us alone for a few minutes. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" asked Sasha. "No, and it's best if we keep it a secret for a few days," I replied. "Are you here in part because Willa was taken into custody last night?" my sister asked. "Yes, and it's going to get worse before it gets better," I said. "As soon as I get to where I'm going to live, I'll be under police protection. All I can say is that the police are looking at the death of my former lawyer with new eyes. They now have reason to believe it is connected to the arson attack on his office." The expression on Jack and Sasha's faces spoke for itself. It was well known from what was going on in Paradise that the district attorney, appointed 3 years ago, was trying to clean up a lot of cases that had never been resolved. "You're a decoy to bait something or someone out," Jack said quietly. "If this is correct, the arson, murder, and several other crimes will be solved in the next few days," I replied. All of this was done to create a situation where I would be forced to return to the city. Willa's arrest and my sudden return will turn a very carefully planned conspiracy upside down. "What's behind all this?" Jack asked. "A $2 million insurance policy with a double indemnity on accidental death," I said. "Insured on me." My sister walked out of the restaurant with me to my rental truck. We were standing around chatting when we noticed Tammy pulling up beside us. "Where are you staying?" my sister whispered. "At the Grand Dame's house. I'll be moving her stuff to the new house," said I. She wanted to be away from whatever was about to happen. "Josie left town. Why?" asked Sasha. "She wants to be near her granddaughter and our 2 sons," I answered with a smile. "Jody and I have been together for over 5 years. We have 2 boys who recently turned 3 and 4. My sister was in complete shock. "How is it that you and Jody are together?" "Josie and I have been in touch the whole time," I explained. "When Jody needed help getting out of a failed marriage, her grandmother called me. I came and moved her to where I lived on my own. We believe it was her ex that caused my lawyer's death and the burning of his office." "Do Tammy and Willa know that you are aware of what is going on?" asked Sasha. "No, but they'll start to find out what's going on when they start making their moves," I replied as Tammy started walking toward us. "Art, I need you to drop part of your lawsuit against us," Tammy said. "The district attorney will file charges against Willa within 48 hours. Unfortunately, my attorney says we can't do that because Willa has filed a new divorce petition seeking desertion, abandonment of the child, and back child support," I said. "Until the court rules on her claims, things have to stay as they are." "You can't say that. How are we going to be able to bail her out with no assets?" Tammy said. "You have a court order to freeze everything." "Maybe your father would be willing to help by putting up his house as collateral," I said. "After all, you're both his daughters." Tammy turned and walked away disappointed. "Willa and Tammy's father has nothing to do with either of them," Sasha said. "Not since he found out about Seth's true origins. He says they turned out to be just as evil as their mother." That brought another smile to my face. Finished with that, I got in the U-Haul and drove towards Josie's house, stopping at a few places to pick up packing materials. 3 hours later, I was already reversing into the driveway of Josie's house. Taking advantage of the large mirror, I put the car as tight against the garage door as I could. Once outside, I locked it up. Before entering the house, I walked around it to make sure nothing had been touched inside. Josie had told me that she had left the curtains open, but I noticed that they were closed. Before entering the house, I texted Peter to tell him I was coming and asked if he had closed the curtains. He replied that there were police officers in the house and perhaps they had closed. Knowing this, I unlocked the front door and went inside. "Mr. Racine," the officer said, holding out a cell phone to me. "There's a Peter Edwards here to speak to you." "Hi, Peter," I said. "Looks like those who need to know, know. Tammy was talking to me at the burger place in the parking lot right after I finished my long lunch. She wanted me to lift the lion on her sister's assets, and I refused." "I heard that," Peter said. "We taped Willa and Tammy talking about having to reschedule their plans. Jody's ex Brad Press came up a lot in their conversation. Willa told Tammy to let him know that you know where Jody is. That alone should motivate him to do what we need him to do. It looks like our thoughts were right, because not an hour later, Brad showed up. Willa told him where you were staying. Our informant who was arrested today told her you were back to move Josie," Peter said. When Brad asked where, Willa said to her granddaughter Jody's house. A few minutes later, I saw the garage bay doors open. Climbing into the box of the van, I pulled out bundles of cardboard boxes, unloading all the things I needed to start packing up the house. At 6:30 in the evening, the pizza order from Papa John's came in. I opened the door when the delivery driver knocked on it. The driver asked if I was moving. I said no. I just went back to get my stuff to help a friend. Brad made his move around 11 p.m. Using a car tire iron, he picked the lock on the front door and slipped inside. Seeing that the only light was on in the kitchen, he headed there, pulling a 9mm pistol from under his shirt. He found me sitting there drinking coffee. "Hey, Art," Brad said. "Willa and Tammy say hi to you. I'm here to find out where Jody is so I can visit her." "Sorry, but that's something I'd never tell my lawyer's killer," I replied. "Or the man who set his office on fire. Before you kill me, because we both know you will. How much were you promised from the insurance settlement?" "What makes you think I did it?" he asked, taking the bait. "Because you look like someone they could convince through manipulation," I said, "to do their dirty work for them. So how much of the $4 million on the accidental death policy on me did they promise you?" $4 million, and they told me it was only for $750,000, he said. I laughed and then said, "Did you know that Seth is actually the son of Tammy's first husband?" His face turned white. "You see, George and I have been manipulated and used by both twins for years," I said. "My attorney, working on my divorce, sued George and Tammy for everything they had." Brad's face went white. "That's why I knew Willis suing me for desertion and back child support was a scam," I said. "The divorce was finalized and only needed her signature to finalize it. She needed to manipulate me into coming back. That's when I put it all together. You're just another patsy they played. So ask yourself, what are their plans for you? My divorce only put their plans for my death on hold. You removing my lawyer has put their original plan for me back in play. You have the opportunity to set them back for years, knowing them as we know them. What does your intuition say?" It's hard to watch a fool come to the realization that as soon as he's needed, he'll be taken out. "I'm screwed either way," Brad said. "The fact that your lawyer lost control of his car and hit a tree at 70 miles an hour is manslaughter." "Manslaughter would get me life," I said. "You can get 5 to 10 for manslaughter, but murder is life. When I'm dead, they can claim you were mad at me because of Jody and didn't know what you were going to do. Did they set you up to victimize you because most accidental death policies don't cover murder?" "If you were in my shoes, what would you have done?" asked Brad. "You'd make a pittance, turn in the state's evidence, and hope your cooperation would be taken into account. That way, you'd get revenge on those who were probably planning to take you out," I said. Brad put the gun on the table and said, "Call the police." I said, "Brad, turn around. They are standing behind your back." Next chapter. Connie watched her husband on the phone and wondered what was wrong. Peter had told her that her father was at Josie's. A late call on his cell phone woke them both up. While he was talking, she put the kettle on to make them both hot chocolate. When Peter picked up the phone, he was smiling. "Your father surprised us all tonight," he told his wife. "Brad broke into the house to destroy it and wanted information on his ex-wife. He talked Brad out of it and basically forced him to confess everything. The undercover cops videotaped the whole thing." Connie froze with surprise. "How did my father do that?" "He told Brad some basic facts that Brad knew nothing about, like the truth about Seth's origins," Peter said. "I think your father convinced Brad that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out for a death by murder, and that was the deciding factor. Even I don't know if that's true or not, but it created the doubt necessary for Brad to accept the consequences of a lesser offense instead of life in prison without parole. Aunt Josie used to say my dad was a quick thinker, but this is something I didn't expect." "What does this mean for my mom and sister?" asked Connie. "If Brad agrees to testify against them in court, they'll both be charged with arson, manslaughter, and at the very least, attempted murder of your father," said Peter. Connie picked up her cell phone and dialed Jody's number to let her know. The two of them made a plan. Josie would watch the kids for a couple of days because Jody was going to the airport to catch a plane. Connie would meet her at the airport when she received a text message about her arrival time. Finished talking, she called her sister and explained everything. Peter had gotten dressed by this time and was going to drive to the station to get a signed statement from Brad before the end of the night. I didn't wake up until 8 in the morning. The first thing I did was call Jack. I needed the front door fixed. He said he had someone he knew, and within half an hour he was there. The front door was replaced, a new trim, and a new lock installed. The gentleman was just finishing the job when my daughter Connie drove into the house with Jody. Jody jumped out of the car and ran to me. Tears were streaming down her face. In that moment, I realized how much she had been through in the past few days. "Brad was taken into custody last night," I said. "He surrendered to the police officers who were protecting me. I was never in any real danger." "If that was the case, why didn't you call me?" Jody said. "Why did I have to hear about it from Connie?" "It was almost 2 in the morning last night when the police cleared out," I answered honestly. "I figured I'd call you today." I put my arm around my wife and pulled her tightly against me, then said, "I promise I will never put myself in that kind of danger again." As soon as the repairman finished his work, we locked the car, putting her luggage away, and went to my brother's restaurant to eat. There we were met by Karen, Sasha, and my parents. Jack's staff had to move 2 tables so we could all be seated together. Jody was properly greeted by everyone. Our breakfast, when it arrived, was top-notch. Jack was so excited about what had happened that we ate it all. My parents were very happy to learn that Jody and I had 2 sons, named Carson and Hunter after both of my grandfathers. I think my parents went through all the pictures of our children and ourselves that Jody had saved on her cell phone. My daughters opened up and told them about how they took Josie out and discovered me. We were still there when Peter joined us. I noticed he looked tired. "Willa and Tammy are in custody right now," Peter said. "Brad has made a clean confession to everything, including his original intent to kill his father. He will be charged with arson and manslaughter when he testifies in the witch trials. Tammy and Willa are charged with 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. The district attorney is now meeting with the divorce judge who handled your father's case to see if he can expedite the finalization of your divorce." "Peter, are you saying that Art and I can finally get married?" asked Jody, trying to comprehend what she had heard. "The DA took the papers with him when he went to see the judge," Peter explained, "along with Dad's original divorce papers. He's hoping that the judge, having been fully informed of everything, will waive the requirement for Willa's signature, the waiting period, and issue the divorce certificate." "Jody," I said, "I think I'd better buy you a proper engagement ring today and finally propose." Everyone murmured at my remark. Tears came to Jody's eyes. She had always believed we would do it, but this was something she hadn't expected. Before we left, Mom and Dad made us promise to come over for dinner. Jody and I busied ourselves packing again until about 5:30, and then we headed over to my parents' house for dinner. Mom and Dad had a lot of questions. Jody told how I had saved her from a failed marriage thanks to her grandmother. Then she told how she got her first job and where it led to. We were still enjoying their company when Peter and Connie showed up with my divorce certificate. It was good to know that I was now free. When Jody was given a chance to talk, she kept bragging about our children and our life together. It was my mom who said we should have a wedding before you both got back. That's when my father got Peter's and I's attention. Grabbing a glass of fresh beer each, we followed the leader. We ended up moving into my dad's den because we couldn't get a word in edgewise. When word got out that Tammy had been arrested, people started calling in with more information. Half of the DA's staff had to help us. Turns out what we knew was only scratching the surface of what the couple was up to. Now it looks like the mayor will go down with them. And what's going to happen to Willa's common-law husband? I asked out of curiosity. And how deeply involved was he in all of this? He'll probably be disbarred, but he'll be involved in raising their children. Nothing we've found so far links him to the witches, said Peter. Has anyone notified Aunt Josie? Connie looked into the room. Jody's daddy wears a size 6.5 ring, in case you were wondering. A few minutes later, Peter and I were on our way to the mall where he bought Connie a set. Knowing Jody's taste, I bought a 3-ring engagement set. When we returned, we were pleased to find that they didn't know we had left. I was on the phone with Josie when Karen and her boyfriend showed up. The house was full, and we all moved into the living room. The men had to bring some chairs from the kitchen. Dad told Jody to sit in his chair. This let my mom know that something was up. So she watched the scene with her eagle eyes. And there was silence in the room as I walked over and knelt down to ask my common-law spouse to legally become my wife. I caught her off guard. Of course she said yes. The party went on. My father proudly said, I need to catch up on almost 7 years of drinking with my son, and Jody and Art, your engagement is the best way to start. Peter had to drive Jody and me back to Josie's. A lot of stress and worry was relieved. Friday, we went to City Hall to pick up our license. Jody found out she had gotten into Connie's wedding dress. Jack agreed to be my best man. Karen became Jody's maid of honor. The DA agreed to do the actual ceremony. I had to buy a suit at Macy's. There was no way my future girlfriend was going to let me marry her in blue jeans. On Sunday afternoon in the backyard of my parents' house in the presence of the entire family, we said our vows to the admiration of everyone. Even the twins' father was present. We told everyone we didn't want any gifts, but my former father-in-law pulled an envelope out of his vest and handed it to me. Colin, this is not a wedding gift. It's your early inheritance, he said with a smile. The rest of my estate will go to your daughters. I slipped the envelope into my suit and forgot about it for the rest of the day. Everyone in attendance videotaped the entire ceremony and texted it to Aunt Josie. Someone asked where we were going on our honeymoon. Jody's response was, after everything we've been through, once Grandma gets settled in the new house, our honeymoon will consist of a week in Florida and a week in California where we will enjoy what Disney has to offer with the kids. Because without family, we wouldn't be where we are today. Before we headed home the next day, I handed Jody an envelope. Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000 with a note on it. It read, "Thank you for helping to fix karma. I always thought the twins killed their own mother. I will enjoy watching them get the reward they deserve for their deeds. And so will my granddaughters." Jody put the envelope in her purse without saying anything to anyone. After hugging my daughters and my parents, Jody and I climbed into the U-Haul car. We drove home without thinking about the fact that we were finally free of all the past. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.